Hello and welcome to Victor Davis Hanson in his own words. This is our Friday news roundup, so we'll look at the latest news of today. This week, the Saudi prince showed up to have a meeting with Trump, and we have more information out about the assassin or attempted assassin of Donald Trump, and that Thomas Matthews Cooks, and then also or Crooks, and then also the Epstein files. So stay with us, and we'll be right back with those stories.
Right is still right, even if you stand by yourself.
Mr. Chief Justice, may it please the court.
This is Hans von Spakovsky, host of the Case in Point podcast, which looks at the hottest cases affecting politics, culture, and everyone's daily lives. But we talk about them without confusing legal jargon. And we have interesting guests, like former House Speaker Newt Gingrich. And we end with reviews of classic Hollywood movies relevant to the topic. Case in Point, the podcast available everywhere you won't want to miss.
Welcome back to Victor Davis Hanson in his own words. You can find Victor at his website, victorhanson.com. The name of the website is The Blade of Perseus, and it has all of his podcasts and writings and books as well, links to buying the books. So please come join us at The Blade of Perseus. You can subscribe for Ultra material at $65 a month $65 a year or $6.50 a month. And we'd love to have everybody. So Victor, we have the Saudi prince in Washington, D.C. We know that the material reason he was there is to buy F-35 military planes and for access to AI technology. And Donald Trump is still trying to secure $1 trillion in investment in the United States. The presses, however, and I'm sure everybody noticed this, thought that the Jamal Khashoggi murder was more interesting, and I was wondering your thoughts on his visit to the United States.
Well, MBS, as he's called, he's the de facto, the royal son who's running the government. We know that he was involved in the order to kill Khashoggi, and Trump basically said, when he was asked, this is a good man, and that guy was writing some really negative things. So that wasn't the right thing to say, obviously, because in a democracy or constitutional cover like ours, you don't kill somebody for saying bad things. I guess you do in Saudi Arabia. But then he kind of stepped in, MBS did, and said, it's not going to happen again. So the long and the short of it is, what do we want from them? We want them to join the Abraham's Accord. They will if there's if there's some kind of state in Gaza, which I don't think the Israelis are going to allow with Hamas involved. They feel it's politically impossible because they're not a constitutional government for them to get ahead of the other Arab countries because they'll get terrorism, or Iran will fund some Shia population demographic inside Saudi Arabia, so they're very wary. Excuse me. I think the key is that he's giving away a lot. He's giving them access to F-35s. Israelis will be against that. We don't know what type of F-35. When we gave them Abrams tanks, we always would say that a U.S. Abrams can blow apart an export Abrams. So I will imagine that a U.S. F-35 can beat an export. But they're getting a good deal, and they're getting a de facto promise to protect them. And Trump said, well, we're doing it anyway. When they sent missiles Iran sent a missile at Saudi Arabia, we try to knock them down. So it's a very good relationship to have. It's much better than calling them a pariah state like Biden did and then going over there and begging them before the midterms, as he did in 2022, to pump oil. However, he's going to get a lot of flack on his base. I think Thomas Massey, his proverbial thorn in his side, has got up and said, "Why are you dealing with this illiberal regime? We want to hear about the Epstein files, or we want to know this or that." And Trump is trying to talk about the $1 trillion that Saudi Arabia is going to invest. And then I think he announced today that he has 20 trillion. And Biden only had, I think, 70 billion in his 4 years of foreign investment. If you cut that in half, and there actually is $10 trillion of foreign investment, the economists have a particular ratio of what that represents in jobs for each $1 billion, but it's millions of new jobs. So getting back to what Trump is trying to do, he's in a race for the midterms. So he's trying to get as much foreign investment. He does not want another war. He wants Saudi Arabia to pump oil to keep the price down, even though it hurts our producers, but benefits our consumers. So Saudi Arabia basically said, okay, we'll pump oil. We won't cause any problem. And we'll try to work with Israel, but we want two things. You got to protect us, and you have to sell us F-35s. And that's where it is.
Yeah. And Trump is his same sort of pugnaciousness with the press. And
Get out of here. You're bad.
you shouldn't. ABC reporters should not be considered a good reporter, or maybe should be fired. I think he said, because she asked the question about Khashoggi. So he was
has a point. When you go back and look at the particular reporters, that same reporter who was asking this really sharp questioning, she asked Biden questions like, what do you think your best legacy is? What are you most proud of? So they all have this veneer of journalistic professionalism. And then when you hear Trump be uncouth and crude and call them names and say, you shouldn't be here, and you go, oh, that's so terrible. But then when you actually look at what's terrible is that they're not symmetrical. They canonize Obama, Biden, and then Trump, they act like they're real journalists for a change.
Yeah. So don't counter Trump is the good advice. Anyway.
Yeah, he has reasons. I just did a weird interview with German TV, and every single question was, as a person who supports the Constitution, what do you think of Donald Trump's efforts to subvert it? And I think, what are you talking about? Who wants to get rid of the Electoral College? Who wants to let in 2 states, Puerto Rico, and then make Washington, D.C. a state without going through the constitutional process? So that's what I'm getting at, is that he's crude, and yes, he's mercurial, but the people in the media are so biased that he has ample grounds to attack them. That's what he's doing.
Yes, of course. So the other big news this week was Matthew Crooks. They were saying he was potentially right-wing in the beginning, and that he had very little social media presence. And it turns out that not only did he have a lot of social media presence, and also using it to publicize threats and extremist ideology, but he frequented left sites, one of which was a furry site, and identified himself as a they/them pronoun. And I was wondering about these new revelations about this wannabe assassin.
Well, he was a Trump supporter, then he flipped and became, he was an anti-Semite. He's very similar to Robinson and the other ones. And there's something going on here when this furrier and all this stuff that Crooks was into, and then Robinson and his gay or trans boyfriend, and we go back. It's a taboo subject we're not supposed to talk about, but I have a feeling that if you would collate all the recent mass shootings and assassination attempts and actual assassinations, and then you ask and ascertain if these people are into these bizarre sexual identities, trans, furries, you would see far more people represented than their actual demographic in the population. But we can't talk about that because there's something unstable about it. And when you create a climate of hatred, then these people who are unstable, and this category of unstable people are sexually unstable, then they express themselves by violence. And we don't know the whole story. Under the former FBI director, they just basically got up there. Their spokespeople just said, "There's nothing here. We went through hundreds of emails. There's something there." You just don't walk in with exemption. He must have had some prior knowledge and surveillance or something and I think that he may have communicated what he was going to do. The same thing with the shooter of Charlie Kirk. There's something there that more people knew about it in advance than we're told. And I think that Kash Patel, if there's something to be found, will get to it.
Yes, and I think also, speaking of mentally unstable, the second guy, I forget his name, Ruth, who tried to assassinate Donald Trump, he was a little bit crazy as well. His lifestyle off to the
Yeah, and I mean,
Ukraine
the
and
left
back.
always gave us, was it Cornel West said that words matter? So if you keep saying fascist, 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 Nazi, 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 Hitler, 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 then a Luigi Mangione or a Ruth or Crooks or Robinson, whatever, they're going to come out of the woodwork, and they're going to think that they're going to be canonized and they're going to be famous for taking out somebody like Hitler.
Yeah.
And that's
Well, yeah, absolutely. All right. So, Victor, let's welcome Allegiance Gold as a sponsor. If you've studied enough history, you start to see a pattern. Nations don't lose their way overnight. They drift through debt and division until one day you realize the foundations you thought were permanent were never permanent at all. Today, America is spending at levels once reserved for wartime. We've normalized deficits that would have stunned earlier generations, and policymakers now debate whether the only path forward is more intervention, more printing, more distortion. But here's the historical truth. Every society that pushed its currency beyond discipline eventually paid a price. The wise never waited for collapse, they prepared for the correction. That's why so many thoughtful Americans, especially those nearing retirement or in retirement, are reallocating part of their wealth into something that has outlasted every paper experiment in human history. Physical gold, not a speculation, but as insulation. Reputation matters, which is why we're partnering with Allegiance Gold, a company distinguished by integrity, reliability, and an A+ rating with a Better Business Bureau. For years, they've guided Americans through transparent education and long-standing relationship built on trust. And right now, they're extending a special Liberty offer for our listeners to help you get started with real gold. Whether your funds are in a retirement account or sitting in the bank, if you believe that the best time to reinforce your position is before the storm becomes obvious, call 844-790-9191. That's 844-790-9191. Or visit protectwithvictor.com. That's 844-790-9191. Again, the number is 844-790-9191. Or visit protectwithvictor.com. History rewards those who take the long view. So we'd like to thank Allegiant Gold for sponsoring the Victor Davis Hanson Show. Well, Victor, let's turn to what we talked about last week, and you judiciously veered off into talking about the economy, and that's the Epstein files. And I thought that was a judicious move last week because we should be talking about the economy, but the Epstein files are everywhere in the news this week. So I was learning, and it's everything from a Democratic Stacey Plaskett who was texting Epstein in real time during congressional meetings, to Marjorie Taylor Greene, who says Epstein files have ripped MAGA apart, and even Larry Summers now has stepped down from public life. And so we got everything on all sides of the political spectrum. What's your thoughts?
Well, the Plaskett was not even a congresswoman. She was a representative from the Virgin Islands. And the reason that she was getting instructions how to, I think it was Michael Cohen, his former lawyer, how to bring him out and embarrass Trump, was that he had one of his sexual mansions in the Virgin Islands. So he has a prior relationship with her in the political. He was probably a donor or supporter of her. So he was intimate with this Plaskett. So she gets up there and basically he's texting her in real time because he hates Trump. So what's the point of all this? The point of all this, they had these Epstein files for 4 years and they didn't release them. Given what they did to Trump, and they coordinated with 5 suits, 91 indictments, they would have leaked anything out. Okay, so they didn't want to release that. So the question is, why? If they're the Democrats, and we know the answer, that there's going to be people like Larry Summers or Bill Clinton coming up, or this representative that were on very close terms with Jeffrey Epstein. So then it comes to Trump. And everybody says, well, we're going to let it out. Pam Domi says, I have the whole file. And they didn't. Now, why didn't they? And everybody on the left said, well, it's because of Donald Trump. That was the stupidest thing in the world, because they would have released it because they hate Trump. That's the one thing that guides, that's their North Star. They hate Trump, but they didn't. And so there was nothing really in there. Yes, there were things like Trump didn't fall for it, or this Guthrie was there for a little while, but there was no, you know what I mean, no pedophilia. So now Trump has it, and he thinks it's a distraction from his economic news. Okay, so there's pressure, and they're saying, we're getting killed by the Democrats, release them. Trump says no. So then the question is, why did he say no? I have a feeling that he said no because there were some prominent Republican donors on that list. And he didn't want to embarrass them. And legally, it's kind of strange. These are sealed court documents, and you're leaking all these names, and you don't know to what degree Larry Summers' career has been ruined. And apparently it's because he asked Jeffrey Epstein, how do I get vertical with this young woman? It didn't really have incriminating evidence yet that he had gone to the island and had relations with underage girls. But he's done for. And that's a good example of what will happen to anybody that comes up in that. So then the question finally is, to what degree is Trump playing 4-dimensional, 5-dimensional chess? Did he know all the time that he was not incriminated? Yes. He knew that they would make something, a mountain out of a molehill, but he probably did not go to the island. He did not do these things that other people did, or they would have leaked it. So now he has all this stuff, and he's saying, I don't want to leak it. I don't want to leak it. Now, is that because primarily he's, as I said, protecting a donor, or is he luring them into a Trump ambush? So then they said, no longer he stonewalls. Marjorie Taylor Greene even agrees with us, and then bam, he's going to let it out. And the first couple of things we learn is a big Democratic former Secretary of the Treasury's former president of Harvard, his whole life has exploded. And then this Plaskett woman, this representative from the Virgin Isles, I mean, that is pretty incriminating. Can you imagine a Republican congressman, and he's interrogating a witness, and he knows Jeffrey Epstein so well that Jeffrey Epstein is giving him real-time instructions. And she says at one point, slow down a minute. I'm coming up yet. I'm coming up next for the question. I need to get, what does this mean? What does this term mean? So she was like a puppet and she's a Democrat, and there's going to be more of it. So I don't know to what degree there will be Republican donor collateral damage, but I think the Democrats stepped in it. And that's what happens when you are driven ideologically. Their ideology is Trump derangement syndrome. Anything he does, we're going to. So he knew that. So at some point he thought, okay, they're distracting from my economic good news and my investment from overseas, and they think they've got something on me, and they think I won't release them because there's donors. But you know what? They started it, so I'll just blow it all up, and if I have donors that get hurt, I'll say they did it. They forced it. And they're going to have more exposure. Basically, Jeffrey Epstein was a person on the left, and he wanted to be a player. He had two purposes in life. He was a high school teacher. He knew nothing about economics. He wasn't a financial advisor. He was a blackmailer, and he was slick. And with Giselle Maxwell, they had a team. She was the daughter of a former media magnate. She understood public relations. So their plan, he wanted to be an intellectual. He wanted to know all the celebrities. So he started out by getting these young girls and then making a web, and he was a spider, and then a celebrity or a big CEO would get entrapped, and he would say to him, oh, I don't know. It's going to get out. You had sex. I didn't know it. That girl that happened to be visiting just for a few hours, did you know she was 15 that you had relations with? And then he probably let it be known it was on tape. So then he said, I tell you what I'll do. I will manage your financial portfolio. And he probably got just an average 7 or 8. They didn't lose money, but he got money that way. He got a fee for that. So he was managing at over $1 billion. That's how he ended up worth about $500 million. And then he got to say, I know the Israelis, I know the UN, I know the president of Harvard. And then that would be a resume, and then that would get another resume. And finally, he was meeting the presidents of the United States. And we don't know to what extent these young girls were part of it, but I hope to God, excuse the expression, that they do not pardon his partner, Maxwell, Giselle. That, from what we can tell from some of the affidavits, she was knee-deep in this sexual exploitation.
She went out and recruited. That's what I've read anyway, that she went out around, found girls that could be easily manipulated.
According to this memoir, she was aging, she felt, and to remain on a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, her task was to bring women for two purposes: for his sexual gratification and for this shakedown that they were being enriched by. And then they had a relationship, but she was sexually involved in lesbian relationships sometimes with these young girls. And these young girls were it's Megyn Kelly got in big trouble because she said that the girls were teenagers and therefore were not completely victims. And that was not, her point was it was not pedophilia, which she would define as sexual relations with children that had not reached puberty. That's an ancient distinction. In the ancient world, a pedophilia was having sexual relations with somebody beneath the age or younger than puberty. After that, until adulthood, it was called pederasty. They used the word, instead of philia, which means love or can mean sex, or erastes, pederaste. Pederastia is actual sexual congress. So I don't know if she made that distinction, but the law does not make the distinction in modern times. Each state sets the age of consent. It can be, I think it's 14 in 1 or 2 states, 15, 18. Usually it's 18. Anything below that, we call it pedophilia, but actually in classical terms, it's pederasty. But you don't just because a girl is at the age of 16 or 17 sexually aware, she's had sexual partners, she's manipulative, she uses her youth, doesn't nullify the idea she can be a victim. What does anybody know at 17? I didn't know anything at 17 or 18. So they're easily manipulated, and it's the responsibility of adults not to take advantage of them, as Jeffrey Epstein, much less humiliate them and make them basically be prostitutes.
Yeah, I think a young kid I think the universities sort of prey on that, to the extent that they are ideological rather than inductive, that they can influence young people all the way up into their early 20s
So
in a
what's
way
really
that they
scary
really
is because there is a non-sexual aspect of manipulating young people, and that's K through 12. And in college, their first or second year, ideologically trying to tell them all sorts of crazy things about trans and gay and abortion, all of that stuff. They should just lay out the issues involved and say, I'm going to teach you the inductive method, evidence A, fact B, situation C. You look at the evidence and then you come up with your own conclusions. I'm not going to start deductively and saying abortion is wonderful, trans is okay, and then plug in evidence that confirms that. But they don't do that.
and it certainly takes a particular kind of parent to help their child to see things rationally and to, um, sort of avoid the pitfalls of young adulthood where you
And
are
how can
very
you do that
impressionable.
when 50, 45% of families are divorced and about 30%, 30, 35 are single parent where the parent is working? And the idea that you're going to have your grandfather, grandmother, aunt, uncle in a 19th century extended family so they can babysit, counsel, doesn't happen. I think that's part of this whole problem with young men. You know, they grew up in single family households, or if they did have a father there, the father was working so hard in the middle class, and there was no grandfather, no uncle there. So no one no one teaches people. The school used to do that, actually. I mean, we had a class when I was a senior called Senior Problems. Senior Problems. And it taught us how to shake a person's hand firmly, but not squeeze it to the point of pain, to look in the eye, but not glare, to be able to write a check with your signature, but not your signature so plainly that it could be counterfeited. We were taught how to make a distinctive signature that would be our own imprint. We were men, Senior Problems. Of course, we had the World War II vintage venereal disease movies that scared us all to death. And they even had, I mean, this was in 1968, 71. So it was only 25 years out. So we actually had the World War II thing. And they were, gosh, it was pretty, after you saw those, you never wanted to date anybody. And so, but they don't have any of that. They don't have any. And then we were told what a mortgage is, what compound interest is, what a credit card was, courtesy when driving, uh, when you say, "Excuse me, I'm sorry," if you come in late, if you came in late to class, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson, I'm late. It's my fault." It was just a whole different world. And I think there's a big emphasis now to bring that back. I think that's what a college like Hillsdale College does. It's holistic. And they even have the idea that not only are you going to be polite, and people insist on that, but most of them come that way to college from their parents. their traditional families. But they reinforce that. They also believe if you live in a country with a Second Amendment, whether you want to shoot a gun, you should be acquainted with it. So they have one of the most impressive gun ranges, and you see young girls out there shooting. And it's not that they want to shoot things, but they know what a gun is. So if they're in a situation and somebody has a gun, or they're in a school and suddenly a person is trying to protect them with a gun, they can pick it up and know how to use it, or they know what somebody's going to do to them with a gun. It's familiarity with firearms.
Yeah,
And
it's an Olympic level shooting range
it is.
at
I've
Hillsdale,
been out there
so
a lot, and it's one of the most sophisticated. I've visited. I've never shot there, but it's very sophisticated. And the good thing about it is it it inculcates young people about gun, not to fear them, and how to use them. And there's other things about being at that campus and the environment that it really does emphasize respect for property, for other people's considerations, for feelings. I don't mean therapeutic, but hygiene, manners, etiquette. It's all there. Our senior problems, the final, I can still remember it. You get a Christmas gift from a third cousin. How many days should it take for you to write an etiquette letter thanking you? What should it say? And you had to write a little letter. I think it was something like within a week, or baby shower. I've given so many gifts to so many extended family, never got thank you back.
no, I don't remember any of that training when I was in
Then we had to,
school
yeah,
either.
and then there was something about, do you just use binder paper in a white envelope, or do you invest a little money at the Selma Stationery, wonderful store, and try to write it on nice stationery? Stationery. It was actually called Selma Stationery Store. The wonderful people ran it.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Maybe we'll return a little bit to those pre-60s,
I hope so. I
values.
hope
Yeah.
so.
Well, Victor, before we move on to Kash Patel and some new information that came out about the COVID and origins of COVID, or at least the debate around it, I just want to say this might just be comic relief, but Jasmine Crockett was accusing Lee Zeldin of getting funds
I
from
saw that.
Epstein, and it was the wrong Epstein. So,
Doesn't faze her. She's wrong about everything. She's made so many wild accusations, and her attitude is, well, if it's not true, it could be. It could be. He's Jewish, so then he has a Jewish. That's how she thinks. And I mean, I feel like I live in a different planet when I see a reporter kissing her, literally getting down on the ground and kissing her feet, or I hear people who were supposedly educated saying she's one of the bright stars. She's a complete lunatic, and she's a racist, and she is a preppy, upper middle class, privileged woman who went to prep school, and she gets up there in Congress and she modulates her accent much more than Hillary or Obama. She can sound like she's she's lived the entire time in the inner city. She's authentic. She's much better at it than Kamala Harris was,
oh, yes, far
faking her
better.
accent.
Yeah, Kamala couldn't do that. Well, let's turn to Kash Patel. And he was on the Glenn Beck show, and he said that he had found evidence that FBI agents were paid to lie about the origin of COVID because they did not want it to be in that lab. That is outrageous, but that's the new information
Yeah, I
this
think what
week.
he's saying is that there was evidence from very early on that it could not have come from a pangolin or a bat. I wrote an article about that reading, and I really got attacked. I think it was by Slate magazine, but it was pretty clear. Tom Cotton really wrote a New York Times op-ed about it very early. And then we had Dr. Stephen Quay. He's been on this show at least 2 or 3 times. And he was one of the first to show that the genetic sequence of that virus, there was key choices about the cleavage site and all that to get all of those right indicated 2 things. Each decision about how to manufacture or how that virus originated always erred on the side of being more infectious. And then 2, the odds were in the millions. To get all of them just right to make it the most infectious possible, you had to maybe 8 or 9 in a million chances. It could only have happened in a lab, and he was one of the first. And then, of course, Jay Bhattacharya, Scott Atlas, they said the same thing. And that administration was what? It was scared? I don't know. I mean, the Trump people, there were people within the Trump administration that said it came, he called it the China virus. And Biden came in, and that was it. It was a felony almost, literally, to say publicly that came from China. I guess they were afraid that it would disrupt their détente with China or foreign investment with China or something. But Andrew Roberts, in this issue of the New Criterion, everyone, the great British historian, has got a wonderful essay. It's a text of a speech he gave about the dangers of China. And he makes what we've said the other day. I think we have 285,000 Chinese students. The idea that the Trump administration would increase that to 600 is lunatic. I know that's a bargaining chip, which maybe you can get a closer relationship, or maybe we can get fewer Chinese exports, but that is a road to perdition, because if just look, they're building, I think they almost have now, they will have within 2 years 3 80,000-ton aircraft carriers, and they look exactly like our 100,000, a little smaller. And then they're going to get another 10 years, they'll be equivalent. Their planes are almost as good as ours. And why we would allow that conduit of technology, they have literally saved trillions of dollars in research and development. It would have taken them organically 50 years to catch up to us. Instead, they just leapfrogged over and had that whole body of technology sent electronically home, and they jump-started, whether it's creating viruses or creating aircraft carriers. And one conduit, not the only one, but one major one, was students, especially graduate students. And they arrest them almost every week. And that's beside the fact that almost every student who returns home to China has to have a minder who interrogates them and says, what did you learn? Did you do this? What was in your course? Did you meet anybody? Who do you think would be sympathetic to us? And it's just, I don't know. I would urge very strongly the Trump administration for not that I have any influence, but that would be a mistake to let 600,000. It's a mistake to have 1 million students here, foreign students, because we have almost the same amount of 200 and something thousand from the Middle East, and we see how that worked.
Well, Victor, let's go ahead and take a break and then come back and talk a little bit about the mismanagement of rebuilding the Pacific Palisades. Stay with us, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Victor Davis Hanson in his own words and our new partnership with the Daily Signal. You can find Victor on his X account, and his handle is @VDHanson, and on Facebook at Hanson's Morning Cup. So please come join us.
I would say that I have had a lot of people, both in the public, come up to me, but also on email, on phone, and they'll say, Victor, we can't find you. And that's because we switched platforms for a variety of reasons I don't want to get into, from just the news to the Daily Signal. And part of that transition entailed getting all new, I guess we would call it keys, but mechanisms to promote and find it. And more importantly, we could not use our prior name, the Victor Davis Hanson Show, nor could we use the Victor Davis Hanson podcast, because we had started out on National Review. So the Daily Signal chose Victor Davis Hanson in his own words. But if you go on the internet or you go to just the news, our prior 800 plus episodes are listed there with ads and everything, called the Victor Davis Hanson Show. But it stops. It's inert, fossilized, ossified on October 2nd of 2020. All the new ones, and from now on, everyone will be Victor Davis Hanson in his own words. And you can find it on our website. You can find it at VD Hanson on X. You can find it at all the outlets of the Daily Signal. So we're getting the word out, but it means that for now, we're getting a lot of people who say, well, you were number 6 or number 8 in the ratings and now you're not. And well, I don't know. I was listening to your thing and it's out of date, Victor. You're back in October. Well, no, you're listening to the wrong show. It's the bizarro Victor Davis, as I've said before. This weird guy named Victor Davis Hanson I don't know anymore.
The doppelganger.
Yes, he's a dog. And he has expropriated my identity. It's identity theft. And I'm going to strangle him someday.
All right. With that, let's turn to the Pacific Palisades, rebuilding the Pacific Palisades. Our federal government, I think it was Doug Burgum, I think it was the Secretary of the Interior, came out and said that they've streamlined everything and opened it up as best they could. But since it's a state and building and rebuilding permits are state and local, both Karen Bass and Governor Newsom are slowing they've done nothing to streamline and make it easier to build.
It's even worse than that. They have suppressed news that state officials knew that when the arsonists tried to burn everything down and they had put out that fire then went latent under the ground or in brush. It was almost as if it was burning charcoal, so to speak. Bad metaphor, but there's something like that. And then the wind blew it back out and it caused a fire. They did not want to let people know that the state officials and local officials had seen the arsonist, apprehended him, and knew that he had tried to start a fire and yet did not go back to that place and monitor day by day, hour, and try to extinguish every trace of it. And that, when Gavin Newsom says, well, an arson caused this, we're not culpable, that's only a quarter true. You're culpable because you knew that there was a danger of that fire reemerging. That's happened a lot. It happened up with the Aspen fire. They put the fire out and then it came back out. And so the other problem is, why don't they just spend a portion of the budget, and I'm sure the Trump administration within guidelines would have given them federal help, to come in with a massive effort and clean all of those lots up? And the answer is, just as they caused the fire by preventing homeowners from cleaning the flammable brush on the hillsides, and caused the fire by not ensuring that that reservoir of 1 million gallons, which would have stopped it, was full, it was empty, and the hydrants weren't working, and the hiring practices were bizarre, so they didn't have the top peeled, and there was no people in charge because the mayor was in Ghana on a junket, and the vice mayor or the deputy mayor was under house arrest because he was charged with a felony of foaming in a bomb threat, and he was convicted. I could go on, but they thought that this is a chance to reimagine Los Angeles. In other words, under DEI and the new neo-socialists of the left, they thought, well, Pacific Palisades, they have these, I don't know, 3,000 to 4,000 square homes, these beautiful Romanesque and Spanish-style homes. They have come from the 20s and 30s. It's too Asian and too white. It's too affluent. Why do they get to have a hillside that faces the Pacific Ocean and is kind of a Malibu up on the mountain? That's not fair. That's not diversity. That's not equity. That's not inclusion. So we'll just kind of say, I can't hear you. You have a permit? Oh, see me next week. I want to help you. And then make it almost impossible to rebuild so that the people do one of two things. They sell or they say, I'm going to Texas or Tennessee. And that's happening. And these lots are not being rebuilt because the owners don't want to be the only person there. I'm there and there's no neighbors. It's a charred moonscape. Who would want to live in that situation? So they are waging psychological warfare under the pretense that we have to do it right this time. And they want basically low income, high density housing right in the middle of this picturesque, beautiful neighborhood. And that's what it's all about.
That must be another reason that the people are not rebuilding single homes is they're afraid that they'll have a plopped down right next to them, a low-income housing
I'll give
area,
you an
and
example of
that's
what they
very
do.
hard.
I had a very good friend. I won't mention any more because he could be identified, but he was a part investor owner of a surgery center. And it was so successful and so beautiful and clean and competent. Everybody had their one-day surgeries there, maybe one night. And it was obviously they should expand to fill the need in the greater Fresno area. But the Obama administration said, no, 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 no. We have identified other areas where they're underserved. So for each room that you put here, you've got to go way over there and build for equity. And so basically they said, "What that area is a very dangerous area. We will not have people that want to drive in that particular neighborhood. And the people in that neighborhood who need surgical care are here all the time. But why would we go into an area where it'll be hard to insure? It'll be hard to protect the security and safety. Doesn't matter if you want it." And they could not expand without doing that. And that's what the Obama administration did all the time with developers.
Yeah, and that's affecting everybody who
So that's
can't
what they're
get
doing.
surgeries,
They're
poor
doing
or
that right
rich.
now. And so it's Karen Bass. I don't know how she's still mayor after what she did. Go to Ghana for no reason right during fire season, and then Gavin Newsom saying, it's global warming. It's climate change. It had nothing to do with the fact that we didn't allow people to clear out flammable brush. It had nothing to do with the reservoirs being empty. It had nothing to do with fire hydrants not working. It had nothing to do with incompetent fire and water executives who were hired on the basis of DEI. It had nothing to do with that. It was climate change and the drought. Gavin, 2024-5 was a normal year as far as precipitation. This year, you just said that we're in a permanent drought, climate change. If you look at the water precipitation level in October and so far November in California, we are headed for one of the wettest years in 30 or 40 years. And that happens. It's happened we're not in a permanent necessary drought. And that's just an excuse for people who give us a left-wing agenda. Oh, you can't glean the forest. You don't want Joe Blow going up to the forest with his chainsaw to get his winter supply of firewood and glean the forest. You don't want a truck going in there and trying to damage the fragile landscape by picking out and taking out, dead trees that are kindling for forest fires. That would be too intrusive. It's better to let the trees, even when they had massive fires or before or they're dying, just let them fall on the ground. They rot and they provide mulch for bugs and beetles, and then birds eat the beetles, and it's just a nice ecosystem. And when if once in a while it burns down, like the Aspen fire or the Paradise, and, people are going to get their hair mussed up, collateral damage, but these people shouldn't be in the mountains. The mountains are reserved for the Sierra Club executives that oversee it and the NGOs who know what they're doing. You don't want Joe Blow going up there and living in the foothills of the mountains. So maybe, insurance rates should go up and discourage them from going up there. A fire once in a while, send a message. That's their attitude. And then we can blame it all on global warming. Oh, CAL FIRE wasn't there? Oh, not enough money in the budget? Oh, no preventive fire strategies? Nobody cleaned the forests as they did for 50 years? Global warming did it, not us. Global warming.
Yes, our administrators and elected officials seem to think they're in jobs that are entitlements and that they don't have a job to do
It's
at all. I
ideology.
agree.
Anytime you have
Yeah.
ideology, whether it's commissars in the Soviet Union or DEI or radical green ideology, it's always an excuse that prevents us from finding the real cause of the problem.
Yeah. Well, Victor, I wanted to turn before we go to our last ad to Tucker Carlson and his argument, debate, discussion against Israel, and it seems to be very pro-anti-Semitic, has heated up this week with accusations against Mark Levin, who is one of our top conservative commentators. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that. I know that he called the most important thing he did was to call Mark Levin evil, which is something strange. And then we also learned that, and I guess we'd have to consult Jack on this, that Tucker was attacked by a demon in his bed. He
said
came out
that.
and claimed
He
that.
said that to
Yeah.
Megyn Kelly. I mean, he did sleep with 4 dogs, he said, so maybe it was the dog was possessed. I guess that's what he's saying. I don't know. As I said, he was very gracious to me, and I was on the Fox News often Monday nights right after his monologue. So and I never heard any of the anti-Semitic or conspiracy stuff from the 7 or 8 years. I can remember when he came to Hoover, none of that. He reflected the views of his wonderful father. His father was a really great person. He was very patriotic. He was anti-communist. He ran, I think, Voice of America. He was very pro-Israel. And then I think it's in Powerline, people quote him that in 2012, when somebody came up to him after a lecture, I think it was, and suggested that the 9/11 attack was a conspiracy, he just said, "You should be ashamed of yourself. You don't do that." And he walked away. That was the Tucker that I knew, and that's the Tucker that I hope reemerges, and I think maybe can. But when he gets in a fight with Mark Levin, he's saying, well, Mark Levin was against Trump. Well, so was Tucker. Tucker said at one point, I don't like Donald Trump. The second thing is, he said things recently that the old Tucker would have never said. For example, the great theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, when Tucker said, even when you call somebody a Nazi or Hitler, it so demonizes the situation that even a Christianity is no defense about the wanting to kill somebody. So if you call somebody, i.e. like me, Hitler or fascist, that will bring out the worst. It's a good argument. But the problem was the simile was terrible. Tucker, Adolf Hitler was a Nazi. If you were there in 1942, 43, right before Bonhoeffer was arrested, and you said to Adolf Hitler, "Are you a Nazi?" "Yes, I'm a Nazi. I'm proud of being a Nazi." That's what he said. He is a Nazi, and he was punished for it. But you say, well, Bonhoeffer called Hitler a Nazi, and then he may have wanted him dead, because whenever you say a Nazi, person's a Nazi, then you want them dead. But in this case, it's not a person, it's a Nazi, and he wants to kill people. He's responsible for World War II, mostly 65 to 70 million dead, 6 million Jews incinerated. And if you can stop that, that is a moral act. And that's what Bonhoeffer said. That was a bad situation, and then he's doubling down now, and I think that's a mistake. I think that I'm not going to tell anybody how to live their lives, but when you look at the conservative movement, we've taken a lot of hits as far as the media. I knew Rush pretty well. When you lost Rush Limbaugh and his ability to extemporize, and he was a genius, and he's gone, and no one's been able to replace him. People are starting to realize that Charlie Kirk, I knew that when he was alive. I said that right before he died, that there was nobody who was able to convince young people that the left were the establishment, not the right, the left. They ran the Pentagon. They ran the IRS. They ran the White House. They ran the corporations. And the natural exuberance of youth to question authority, he encouraged. He said, be rebellious. That was a very unique take on that, on the campuses. In other words, it said, In the old days, when you were conservative and you were traditionalist, you were an old fuddy-duddy, and people made fun of you that you never had your youthful flirtation with change. And don't listen to that. You are the revolutionaries. You are the rebels. You are reacting against an ossified reactionary left. He's never been replaced. He won't be replaced. Tucker, prior to all of this, he had developed an audience from Bill O'Reilly, had a huge audience. People thought that when Bill O'Reilly left, the whole network would collapse. One reason, within about a year, he had recaptured Bill O'Reilly's. That was an amazing achievement because Bill O'Reilly was a very adept newscaster. I know people thought, because of the reasons that he departed, but he was a very bright guy. I used to watch him. It was an Inside Edition. He was really good, and Tucker was able to recapture that audience. In some ways, he augmented it as the audience naturally grew larger. And some nights, 3 or 4 million people were listening to him, and he was very skilled. That's why all of this is so. To lose all these people through death or assassination or what's ever happened to. When he said he was possessed, something has possessed him. And I know that he was treated unfairly to the way he was let go by Fox on a Friday night. Why would you do that on a Friday night? Why wouldn't you have maybe they had, I'm speaking of ignorance, maybe they had prior discussions. But the Tucker that I knew and the Tucker that most people knew he would be on the other side of the issue with Tito Fuentes, Nick Fuentes. I'm a San Francisco Giants ancient fan. So what I'm getting at is he would have interviewed Nick Fuentes the way he did Ted Cruz, and he would have interviewed Ted Cruz the way he did Nick Fuentes. And why he didn't do that, I am not going to speculate. But what's happening on both sides of the issue, if you read the American Conservative and Chronicles and people behind Tucker and the Groypers, Nick Fuentes has added almost 1 million viewers to his various venues. He's getting that. He got a shot in the arm like you would not believe. And then you read James Kershick wrote, or John Podhoretz in commentary, everybody's doubling down. So there's no way, and I'm not saying they're morally equal. I tend to fall on the he's not the Tucker, that you cannot institutionalize anti-Semitism, conspiracy theory, and it's incumbent upon all conservatives to call that out. But the point that I'm making is it's tearing everything apart. And I don't know. I don't see a solution. It's like the left. The left is going to decapitate all of its senior leadership. Schumer, Pelosi, even Hakeem Jeffries. His DEI sterling credentials are not going to help him. They're going to get every socialist they can in office. And they're going to run all the big cities. There are going to be a lot of blue state socialist governors. It's going to be like the 1930s. And it's going to blow up the Democratic Party because Americans are innately not socialist. And the economy is going to, I think, boom in 2026. I really do. Given the foreign investment, the deregulation, the taxes, the increased natural gas and oil production, everything looks good. And that will hurt the neo-socialist. And so,
since you've just arrived there, let's take a break and then come back because I wanted to talk about the Democratic Party in New York State. So stay with us, and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to the Victor Davis Hanson in His Own Words show. And you can find Victor on YouTube and on Rumble, and now our audio is available on Spotify as well as the video, so you can do the video on Spotify too. But I know that we have a lot of adamant audio listeners, and so go to Spotify. It's also streamed to iHeart as well, so there's some venues there to find the audio. So in New York, the Democrats are tussling with each other after the Mondami election. And what the issue is that Mondami needs raised taxes. And the governor, Kathy Hochul, does not want to raise taxes, or at
Yes,
least
she has
she's
no ability to
intimated that
raise the
way.
state income tax. It's already over. I think it's higher than California in the top bracket, 13.4. We're 13.3.
Yeah.
It's exorbitant. It's outrageous. He wants to go higher, but he doesn't have any ability to do that.
So, and the reason he wants to go higher is because he's offering free childcare, and he's got this idea of these grocery stores that will be state-run. And so they're talking about how Hochul, who has been adamant against raising taxes again in New York, is getting a lot of pressure that if she doesn't line up with the Mondami strain of the Democratic Party, they're going to have to take her down. And I was wondering your thoughts.
She knows, like Andrew Cuomo, each of them in the past has said, if you don't like our left-wing crazy socialist state, leave. Cuomo said that, I think, about abortion. She did the same thing. And then people left. There's been over probably 2 million New Yorkers have left in the last 4 or 5 years. And they've taken capital with them. And so she knows because she's in a position of responsibility, unlike Mondami, who's never run anything. She knows what he will do. So she is saying to him, we're not going to raise, we're already the highest, or second to the highest income tax rate in the country. The problem is in New York, state and city, they want to go full communist when it already is not working because it's socialist. So when he says, I want to have free bus people, they're saying, we don't have any revenue as it is. We're broke. The buses are dirty. They don't run on time. We can't get people to pay because half the bus riders don't pay. If you want to reduce subway prices, it doesn't work already because half the people go over the turnstile. If you want to give rent control, the reason we don't have more development and building, we have over 1 million rent control, and there are people like you who are not hurting that are in rent control, from affluent multimillionaire families as well as the poor. So what the problem is, the only solution would be to do what Bloomberg tried to do and Giuliani, and that would be to deregulate the most regulated place in the world, to lower taxes and give incentives, and to call in the business community and say, how can we get investment and build more units? And what incentives do you want to do that? And then bring in the transportation people and say, how can we get cleaner, safer mass transit? What do we have? How do we get somebody like DeCarlos Brown off the subway? Because he didn't even pay. We don't want people like that, even though he wasn't in New York. So it's just so bizarre that the problem with New York is that it's socialist, and then they want to have the solution as communism. It's not going to work.
Do you think Kathy Hochul is seeing her last days as governor?
Well, I don't know. I don't know I'm not familiar enough with New York, but she's got a lot of really people who've talked. Lee Zeldin did very well against her. He came pretty close in New York. The problem in New York and the problem in Manhattan, that why you don't have a Governor Pataki or another Giuliani, even a conservative Democrat in the old days like Patrick Moynihan. And the answer is that it's same answer to California. People walked away. Millions in California have walked away. Every Reagan, Pete Wilson, George Dugmasian voter is gone. Not everyone, that's exaggeration, but 10 million in the last 40 years. And the same thing in New York. And they've been replaced by people. 65% of the people who voted for Mondami, or 65% of all immigrants voted for Mondami. So you have a lot of people who were not born. In California, there's 27% of the population was not born here. And most of those, not all, but most of them came poor and were dependent on SNAP and etc. That was
Government
by design.
entitlements.
That was by
Yes.
design.
Yeah. Well, since you mentioned California, the last thing I wanted to talk before we go to comments is Politico, that is a left-leaning publication for anybody who knows, has an article that says Gavin Newsom is the sure frontrunner for 2028 for the Democrats. And I want to explain the reasons to you, and then you can reflect on them. They said he is, one, well-positioned. He looks younger than 58.
Yes.
He's broken into social media with his
Yes.
new podcasts and his social media team, and he has a charisma of Clinton.
Yes.
And all these Trump challenges, the ICE agents and the fire, the dealing with the fire, have really actually made him stronger rather than
It
affected
made him
him.
stronger with his base. His strategy, remember what it was. He thought that he would be the front runner, and what had lost Kamala Harris the election was that she had a record that was so far left that every time she was on the stump, she either had to not talk to the media or bump in once in a while to an honest journalist who said, well, you were out on there's 10,000 illegals coming in a day. You were the border czar. You were on record. See that video? You said no deportations. You wanted to confiscate guns. We don't believe you ever owned a Glock. You said you were going to ban fracking. So then Gavin says, look, I can win, but the way to win is what Mark Penn and Halpern and Carville said. You got to be in the middle. And I'm so far, I will be nominated. So he brought on Charlie Kirk, and he brought on Steve Bannon. Remember that? And he said, I'm a centrist, and I'm a technocrat. Okay. And then suddenly said, hey, Gavin, that's not the right strategy. You have to get nominated for first before you pivot to the center. And you're not going to be nominated because these are not like it was in the Clinton days. This is not like it was even in 2020 with Biden. These people are communist and neo-social. They will never vote for you. So what you have to do, you've got to go start using the the F-bomb. You've got to be profane. You've got to attack Trump every day. You've got to go and endorse all the left-wing candidates. You've got to be so far left, there's nobody to your left. Then you get the nomination. And then you can lie and do stuff because you're slicker than Kamala Harris about your record. That's his strategy. But the problem is, all they have to do is say, Gavin Newsom wants to do to the United States what he did to California, and then just run. I could do the commercial today. Gavin Newsom wants to do to the United States what he did to California. Here's what's in store for you who vote for him. Half of all the homeless, largest number of people in poverty, 1 out of 3 welfare recipients, highest kilowatts in the country, with 1/4 of his population doesn't even pay their power bill, highest gasoline taxes, highest gasoline prices, highest insurance costs, highest or second highest state income taxes, $60 to $70 billion shortfalls every year, deficits. And just keep doing that. And look at California, the largest exodus of any state, largest exodus in numbers of any state. And then just show visuals, the Paradise Fire, the Aspen Fire, the Pacific Palisades fire, then show the rail yard out by LA Harbor, then show downtown San Francisco, the homeless, and then show about 6 pictures, tragically, of immigrant truck drivers jackknifing. There was one the other day, just it happens every day, and say, this is what he wants to do to the United States. And you'll
Yes.
win.
Yes, and the strange thing about the Political article is they seem to be suggesting that he was well-positioned because of that record you just
Marco
enumerated. I don't
Rubio and
think he
J.D.
is.
Vance, and I don't know if DeSantis, go back to that debate. Gavin did all of his little gymnastics, his little arm tweak and his, shoulder move and all of that. He had his hair slicked back. He looked great. DeSantis looked plodding for the first 10 minutes. He had all of the talking points. Gavin, what do you think about fire control? Well, here in California, we represent the people. Gavin, what do you think about your high tech? And here in California, we believe in diversity and equity. It was just canned answers. It had nothing to do with the questions. And after about 10 minutes, DeSantis just like, we have half your population, and we have no income tax, and we spend about a quarter about the money that you do. And he just compared Florida to, and people, Gavin, why is everybody from California going to Florida? Nobody from Florida is going to California. Just stuff like that. And he wore him down. And then all of a sudden people said, he's a fool, Newsom. I really have strong feelings. I think, and I'm a lifelong 5th generation Californian, I have never seen anybody do more damage to this state than he has. There's not one person alive, given his resume. His resume has no resume outside of government in California. On the city council of San Francisco, as the mayor of San Francisco, as a lieutenant governor of California, you're talking about 32 years that he was instrumental in Bay Area. And remember, this is not 1960 where Los Angeles ran the state. The Bay Area and the $11 trillion of market capitalization in Silicon Valley, that runs the state. And he's right there with Nancy Pelosi, the late Dianne Feinstein, Barbara Boxer, Jerry Brown, Nancy Pelosi. They did it. They created California as we know it today. I should say destroyed it. And they're all wealthy.
Yeah, and they don't suffer the consequences of what they've done. So, Victor, let's go ahead and turn to comments. And you recently had an article on the reality caught up with climate change. And so these are some responses to that. What I chose them, I thought they were interesting because these readers have proposed things that are other ways of getting energy. But anyways, the first one has a very short quip for Bill Gates, and then he talks about something that illustrates an alternative. He goes, if Gates wants to, and this is from Tionico, if Gates wants power to run his AI playhouses, okay, let him build the sources. And then he goes on to say the small, totally contained nuclear power plants that run our Navy are proven safe and reliable, cost-conserving, and the Navy doesn't spend years of studies, testings, permitting, etc. They just take out the blueprints and make another one just like the other ones. So the Navy can do it because it's government. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes. And you're going to see a lot of left-wing billionaires flip, either directly involved in AI or investors. I think Sam Altman, the so-called guru of AI, said we needed 100 gigawatts. A gigawatt is 1,000 megawatts. Megawatts, not watts, 1,000 megawatts. So basically a good-sized power generator does about 1,000 megawatts. So he's saying you need 100 of those plants every year just to do the AI. And so if you're a left-wing investor or you want to get rich among the Silicon Valley elites, you say to yourself, who's going to allow that to happen? wind and solar, you'd have to pave over the whole state of California with solar panels and turbines. You still wouldn't be able to do it. So that people abdicated. The second group that abdicated were the people who said, none of these people believe in what they're saying. John Kerry, Al Gore, they fly private. The Pelosi's, they have these huge mansions. They have natural gas heating. The people in LA they are talking about making the middle class use less electricity and natural, if at all. They can't but it's not them. So it's an elite top-down argument. And so that was a radical change. The other change was fossil fuels were geostrategic, and for the left. The left they hate Putin. If you hate Putin, then the way to hurt Putin is to pump oil and gas and lower the world price, and he'll go broke. If you want to help Ukraine, it's to do two things: lower the price so Putin cannot buy weapons and fund his war machine, and start shipping liquid natural gas to Europe so it doesn't have to buy Russian gas. And that's another argument why you want natural gas and more oil, not to mention the lower prices for the middle class. But they were exhibited, disclosed, outed as elites, because this whole green thing. And then finally it's like this year in California, it's wet. So we only have about 140 years of accurate record company. The planet's 4 billion years old. Man has been here 300,000 years. We've had plenty of evidence of natural cycles of cold and hot well before the Industrial Revolution. So we don't really know, and yet there's a fourth reason why the whole thing blew up very quickly. China sends us turbines and solar panels below the cost of their production. They have destroyed the American solar and turbine manufacturing industry and the European, and they supply now about 80% of the world's turbines and solar panels. Now, why do they do that? They're not making all that much money on it because they destroyed the market, the competition, by undercutting them, by selling stuff either at cost or below the cost, because they want us to have renewables. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. They're building 2 to 3 coal and nuclear plants aggregate per month, while they're telling the rest of the Western world, you guys got to get wind and solar. Here, we got them. They're cheap. Take them. And therefore, our products will be more expensive, and we'll have to import more Chinese goods, and they'll be able to have more foreign exchange, and they'll build more weapons. But they're not. They're responsible, they and India, for the vast majority of carbon emissions.
Yeah, we know that, yes. So another solution was from Dan Stormquist, and he was talking about liquid fluoride thorium reactors. And he says that these liquid fluoride thorium reactors are also much safer to operate than our typical water-cooled reactors. Thorium is also fairly abundant and does not have the same shelf life of uranium. Promoting this technology greatly reduces the chances of nuclear weapon.
I think we're going to see a lot of we're going to see a lot of ways to use natural gas, nuclear, oil, hydroelectric in much more efficient fashion. And we're going to see, it won't die out, solar and wind, but the amount of land and area they require, they're antithetical to every green dogma. They kill wildlife. They take away precious farmland. You can't recycle them. They're from China. It's just it's contrary to everything the left tells us, and that's an ideological, commissar decision. Wind and solar are the only they're the party line, and therefore forget about the environmentalism, the recycling, anything, and that's how they think.
Yeah. And then finally, Thomas O'Brien reminds us it took Trump to really break open the climate hoax. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get someone of his caliber every presidential election? Yes, it would be. Well, we'll try.
Yeah,
we'll try here on the
I was listening to Trump yesterday and today, and everything he says is great. And then it's like people whisper in his ear, don't mention Biden. You mention him so much. And then he says, and I brought all this and Joe Biden. And then people say, he goes, I don't get much sleep, but I don't need it compared to Joe Biden. And that's part of the package, everybody. That if you want things done quickly and efficiently, and it's done constitutionally, so I'm not suggesting it's autocratic, but you're going to get somebody to cut through the red tape and bureaucracy has a particular type of personality that cuts through everything, whether you want it to be cut through or not, in areas other than government.
And, if I had to say, I see Gavin Newsom as trying to mimic
He
Donald Trump,
does.
even more so than Rubio or Vance.
No, he
and I'm
tries to. He
wondering-
uses capital letters, exclamation points. He doesn't intentionally debate Trump, but he's not
He,
very good at it, or his young media techies are not very good at it.
yes, but he also tries to get every camera he possibly can and be out there for an interview at any moment. And at least that's what I've been noticing recently
He-
with Gavin Newsom.
Put it this way, if you took a young person who was from a notable family and you plopped him down in the wealthiest environment in the nation, that is San Francisco, but they did not have the resource. They're upper middle class, highly educated, but they did not have the type of resources of the people they associated with, i.e. the Gettys. And then you let that person, he was out in the real world, and he had a womanizing problem, he had a drinking problem, okay. And then that wealth that knew him banked him on every single deal. And then he had to marry. He married twice. That's okay, but he was caught fooling around with his best friend's wife. But anyway, forget those minor or major foibles. And then he married somebody who's very wealthy. And you say, most of your life, you were not out in the dog-eat-dog world. You were not a self-made person. You were subsidized because people felt you were young, good-looking, hip, from a nice family, and they wanted to help you and invest in you for a quid pro quo. You would have him. He is the archetypical Nepo baby. He really is. And I say that without any personal venom toward him, but just the result of it, he has done. If he just came down to the San Joaquin Valley and spent, say in August, just spent 10 days and you gave him a car and said, I want you to drive between, Tulare and Delano, just every day on the 99, see what it was like. Or you said to him, here's how much money you can spend on air conditioning. It's $108. Go stay. Maybe you can go to Walmart and get free air conditioning. Sit there all day like hundreds of people do. Just see what he created, or the type of homeless situations where if he had, instead of having this $9 million home, have him have a nice little brownstone in San Francisco with a whole street of homeless people at your doorstep, and see what that would be like. But he doesn't do that. Or have him have to commute every day down, 101 or I-5 and see 3 trucks in the left, middle, and right lane going 75 miles an hour, and none of them who are driving speak English or read English. And he has to deal with that.
Yeah.
But he doesn't.
No, he'll never know those things. All right, Victor, this is the end of our show. We'd like to thank our audience for joining us, and thank you for
Thank
all
you,
of the
everybody,
wisdom.
for listening and watching the Victor Davis Hanson in his own words show.
And our Friday edition, which is a news roundup. Thank you, and this is Sami Winc and Victor Davis Hanson, and we're signing off.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to the Daily Signal. Please like, share, and subscribe to be notified for more content like this. You can also check out my own website at victorhanson.com and subscribe for exclusive features in addition.